Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Welcome back to Streaming Media Connect 2025. I'm Steve Nathans Kelly, editor of Streaming Media Magazine and the chair of this conference. And despite what the title card said, if you noticed that, you are now joining us for LLMs on Air, generative AI cases for news, sports, and entertainment. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping notes. The first person to correctly identify the track and the artist that you heard as we were coming on stage here will win a $50 gift card from Amazon. Now, we'll announce that at the end of the session, and you must be present to win. Closed captioning is available, and I'll be putting a note in the chat after I get through these introductory remarks on how to turn that on and off. Sessions for all 3 days will go live on the Stream Media YouTube channel. I also put a note in the chat about that. Some of those sessions are already up there now. And join us back here, right back here, May 20th to 22nd for the next Streaming Media Connect. If you want to submit a topic, an idea, or you just want to join a panel and be part of the fun for that, I'll put a link to the call for speakers into the chat. It might still say February, but if you send that in and respond to that, it'll get to me. And over the next couple of weeks, while we're planning the content for that, it'll kind of go into the thinking of what we do. Um, so I think that is about it. Without further ado, I would like to bring to the stage our moderator for this session, Brian Ring of Ring Digital, hashtag Future of TV. Hi, Brian. How are you?
Hello, great to be here. Thank you, Steve.
See you.
I'm ready to take it away, yeah?
All right.
It's
All
gonna be
yours.
fun. Let's bring the panelists all on at the same time here. We're gonna start with I've got three folks here that have been in the business for a long time. Andy Beach, veteran in a range of ways, but 12 years at Microsoft, which is worth pointing out. Also, most recently did some amazing work in the fast space and interactivity. So that's something we're gonna dive into. We've got Pete Scott, Chief Strategy Officer of Play Anywhere, doing some of the most innovative, groundbreaking, and I would say long horizon type of work. He was at 32 years at Turner. The guy's had an amazing career, well deserved, incredibly smart and sharp. I don't see him showing up with this camera yet, but he will. And then we've got Rafi Mamalian. I hope I'm saying that right. VP of Innovation Lab at Sinclair. And Rafi, we're super grateful to have you. Not only are you into some of the depth of the media and the content and the AI, but we're really also going to talk at a very high level about different ways of working. And actually, that's how I'm going to kick this off. And I'm going to start with Rafi, and then we'll go to Andy and Pete. Talk a little bit about what you're doing at Sinclair, Rafi, and then a little bit of a fun bake-off. Like, what's your favorite tool? Are you using GPT? Are you using Claude? Are you using Perplexity? Give us your little subjective bake-off test of that, and then we'll go down the line.
Sure. So yeah, I'm Rafi, VP of the Innovation Lab at Sinclair, and my team and I explore a lot of the new technologies, tactics, and largely it's been 6 years now we've been in the space, and the last couple of years has been almost 100% focused on AI implementations, both in the content and media side and also on the enterprise workflow optimization sides. Um, and gosh, with every new, obviously, announcement and breakthrough, I'm constantly flipping between them, right? So I'm using Perplexity a lot more for day to day, and for like just general search on my phone, I'm using Mistral. And for the agents I've set up, and now I'm exploring all the different deep research projects, OpenAI's, ChatGPT is, kind of at the forefront of that for me.
Awesome. Let's move to you, Andy, number two. Give us a little bit about what you're doing these days, if you will, and then dive into the question of like, what's your take on which LLM assistant is best for you?
Sure. Well, I have been taking time since I left Microsoft in January, but that's just meant I've had time to do more writing and writing of things that you could never necessarily say under a corporate email address. So that's been fun. So anybody who wants to see what I'm blathering on about can feel free to check out my Substack. Um, what have I been doing? What LLMs am I using and playing with? I mean, I was using GPT way back at the beginning, in part because of the close relationship with Microsoft, but also they had such an early approach to being able to customize agents that I have a lot of highly customized agents in my own voice that I work with there. But I have been getting a chance to expand. I've been using Gemini a lot more and seeing how it integrates into all the various parts of Google Workplaces and other pieces. Uh, Doing a lot with Midjourney for image testing and playing around. And then I'm sort of testing all of the video models right now to just to see when they're ready for prime
Yeah.
time.
That's awesome. A good segue as well for me to just say, number one, if you're in the audience here and you've got questions, throw them up. We're going to try to attack as many of those as possible. And also, just kind of a footnote, I love what's going on in the LLM space, and getting them on air and into production is super, super challenging and difficult. But I also did tell these guys we want to go blue sky as well. We want to go to image and journey and video. And also, we're going to talk about enterprise and workflows and things like that. All right, Pete, give us a little bit about what your kind of deep take is today and like play anywhere, but then also give me that personal take of like which of these tools are you using that you really are liking the best?
Yeah, hey, thanks for hosting, Brian. Really appreciate being here. When I left Turner about 2 years ago after a long and illustrious career, the idea was we just saw this sort of gap for interactive rights, and we think it's the new media rights category that we're working with leagues, with content creators, and now AI engines to sort of interpolate what is interactivity, what can you do, place bets, buy a shirt, or get personalized ads. So we've sort of expanded that, left that language all over the world, and we're seeing a really big interest. I think interactive TV and what happened with Jennifer Aniston's sweater 30 years ago was frozen in time. And I think what we've built allows revenues to be shared, which always encourages a lot more people to participate. On the AI side, I put like 4 on my phone and I sort of test them, right? So I think Perplexity is sort of more e-commerce sort of easier to use. I can look at plane tickets, hotel rooms. It goes out and fetches these different scenarios. ChatGPT is on my phone. I think it's really, really good for writing documents. If you have to put together a quick document. Claude is nice. I think for me, it's a little stiffer, meaning it doesn't have a lot of flexibility or returns an answer that maybe is not precise. I think when Mira Murati, basically in her genius, opened up, she was the CTO of OpenAI, and she needed to basically, expedite the process of OpenAI to learn more. And she did that by just opening up to everybody. So I think probably ChatGPT is more of the utility knife, just because more people are using it and basically prompting it. So I credit her for sort of, getting that initial push, which sort of put them in that pole position, so to speak.
All right, since you bring her up, super interesting segue into the first topic. I remember seeing her during an interview. I don't remember exactly who the interviewer was, but basically said something to the effect of, wait a second, so where are you? How are you training these public data? Public data? What do you mean? Oh, YouTube. And there was this sort of awkward, like, oh. And then I did my research later because I was like, surely not all YouTube videos can you train on. There is kind of a subset of YouTube videos that you can train on, but all of that is a very long wind up to what I thought was a very big deal last quarter, Lionsgate, which did strike, I think, the first deal, Lionsgate with Runway. And there was of we're going to use your movies to train our models. And I thought there was a little bit of controversy, not controversy, but the discussion, like, what are they thinking? Are they thinking we'll give you this data and you'll have better models? Are they thinking, oh, our storyboarding process can be completely flattened out if we do it, if we do that? And I'm going to point this to Andy because you have this relationship with Flikforge and this idea of like how you would license these technologies for training. So take that where you were. What do you think Lionsgate wants to get out of this other than money? Are they going to really use this, or is it just getting money to make the tool better? What's your take on these using studios to train data and things like this?
Yeah, so I have been advising a company called Flikforge that's new in the space, but is working on an ethical AI approach to how do we allow people to work with LLMs and generative AI and still retain ownership of their brand or even monetize themselves or a brand through what they're doing. I think, what Lionsgate is looking for here is a good, important first step for where everybody is going. I think everybody who's sitting on an archive of content is now trying to wake up and think about what are the implications of this kind of IP in a data age, and how and where they're going to monetize it. This is not necessarily the right approach, but it is a good first start to going. I think it is probably more of a test of just what is the value of this purely as data, not as content I'm licensing for a deal somewhere. But it is the beginnings of a direction that we're going to see more and more granular pieces. And I think there's times where myself as an individual, I'll be able to use that data in a meaningful and interesting way with LLMs as well, because they're going to want to understand the reactions of an average user in the systems. And there's going to be some point where they have to reward that and monetize that for me, not just take that money and give me nothing for free.
Yeah, I mean, okay, Rafi, going to you on this, I think we had a really good discussion around the theoretical, like what you could possibly imagine. But like, wait a second, that doesn't make any sense for our business. And I'm specifically talking about something that I heard from senior news people on a senior news panel. And I mean, no disrespect, like everybody's dreaming about stuff. And I thought to myself, yeah, if you did have a big news operation and you thought you could maybe create something like this, it would be nice to have all that training data of all the morning shows with similar looking sets and similar branding, etc. And I kind of tee that up to you. Like, it's really important to figure out, does the use case make sense? It's kind of tech 101. Like, I just because I have a hammer, I don't go swinging at everything. So tell us a little bit about your sense of like how you're sifting through what's going to make sense and how do you make this work for your business?
Yeah, I mean, it's a delicate approach, right? So, especially when you're dealing with local news, with the community and the authenticity is paramount. And you don't want to lose any of that by influencing the content with AI generated media avatars and things of that nature, right? Like there's going to be a little bit of a time ramp before the public is kind of comfortable with that. And obviously we're at a very delicate time in television, broadcast television. And so ensuring that we keep that authenticity is important. That said, there's a lot of different ways where we can utilize AI to empower our producers or journalists and things of that nature, to get more immersive with this storytelling, and get them to spend more time with digging deep, going several layers deep with a particular story, which we feel like we can effectively do.
Yeah, let's double down a little bit on that one for you, Rafi. Of like, we talked a little bit about some of these ideas of when you're you're going to take a 4 hour thing and compress it down. But I think actually what I want you to lean in on a little bit more even is very big picture. This new, you talk about new layer in the enterprise, like the agentic workflows. I'll just let you lay it out a little bit of like, there's some silo that has some viewing data. There's another silo that does content, right? Tell us a little bit about that high level stuff that you're mandated to do there at Sinclair, where it's like, yeah, this isn't just changing the media business, but changing the way we work, at an enterprise level.
Yeah, I mean, we're at a point where we really have to start thinking about the future of work. These new tools are so powerful, and we're just starting to see the benefits of it, and it's very, very, very early days. When you think about all the things that are capable of being done, there's in a large enterprise, you have to account for scale, and different departments have different responsibilities, different data sets. And a lot of times what we see is that, data that doesn't necessarily communicate with other, components of data. We feel like there are opportunities now to make those, silos of data more interconnected, that can help us glean more information about the operations. And so that could happen anywhere from, the newsroom to the types of stories that are being told to the engagement that's being produced on the digital properties, to accounting or arrears or, trafficking and programming, and, trying to get more information about viewer behaviors and habits and things of that nature. So it's so early days, and every day the technology is getting better and better. I feel like, one of the analogies I use now is that, like, we've got this amazing technology, but really it's kind of like when you launch the App Store on the iPhone, and people were making these very basic apps to, like, you fill up a beer and pretend like you're drinking it. That's kind of the stage that we're at. It's a kind of a novelty trick, but we're really haven't yet to unlock all the capabilities.
Yeah, I totally agree. Pete, you have a deep background around in highlights. It wasn't sports, obviously, but I mean, what's interesting, because I've known you for such a long time, it does seem like, yeah, we had highlights version 1 and then highlights version 2. And I do feel like we're kind of in highlights version 3. We talked about this a little bit, like WSC, you're associated with automated clipping. Today, the hot ones like Opus Clip. And we talked about this a little bit. Yeah, it actually does a pretty amazing thing with, like, clip number 1, 2, and 3 are pretty awesome, but it's generated like 40. And after like the first 2 or 3, you're like, wait a second, clip 11 should be with 16 and 2. So tell me a little bit about what you think is happening. And let me just say this and let you go on this, but like, you really have taken a stance for a long time of how important highlights are, how we have to monetize them. And you've just been so right on it, where it's like, even the young kids and they just watch highlights and sort of talk trash to each other. How much is highlights and the next generation of that important to what you guys are doing, and how you see LLMs fit into all of this, specifically like the LLMs on air? How do you get these into production where they're actually doing these clips and you can trust them?
Well, I think, first of all, my old company, Bleacher Report, in this last new renewal for the NBA, they basically paid a rights fee, because Turner lost the NBA to our friends at NBC and Amazon. But they actually paid a separate fee to have highlights for the NBA. And they wrote a big check for that. And I think it was symbiotic because Bleacher has such a young demo. And you're 100% right. They're basically munching on those highlights instead of watching a live game. And I've said this before with you. It's like, if you aggregate live rights and highlight rights, you could one day have it competing against each other in the sense of the value of those rights. And just like you said, WSC, and others who have basically automated the clipping of highlights allows all of that to happen. And then, if you're able to basically know the user, right, go into a Databricks or a Snowflake and know that I'm a fan of this particular team or player or action, sort of what ESPN wants to do in the next version of ESPN Plus, create a personalized sports center for every single person. And to me, that's super, super valuable because your chance of engagement, click-throughs, associations with advertisers just grows, because at scale, with large language models and with AI, you're able to hyper serve every single individual, with the right content in the right place and on the right platform. So I
Just
think
a quick,
that's,
yeah.
yeah, go ahead. No, go
No,
ahead.
just a quick follow-up at it. Just my like news journalist popped. Are you saying, let me even get this right, like, of that whole thing with the Zaslav, the WBD, and the NB, this was an escape hatch because you saw like that was part of the settlement. Okay, well, we'll take the highlights. That's absolutely fascinating and something that is super interesting for you to be watching. It's been pumping.
Yeah. Yeah. Then just, to their credit, they were able to get inside the NBA and getting a, license fee for inside the NBA, right? There, and ESPN's going to use Charles, Kenny, Shaq, and EJ for their halftime show. So I think there's negotiating, right? So
Yep.
exactly what you said, you're horse trading all the assets that you possibly have, what can you get in return? I thought it was interesting, really quick on the news stuff, what Rafi was saying, training these models, shooting the video or sourcing the video from affiliates. Probably what was never even thought of is, do I have the right to use affiliate footage to train models? And do I have to bifurcate large libraries to say, hey, this was CNN cameraman or this was Sinclair cameraman, and we can use this, but my affiliate in Los Angeles, I never did a deal with him to show O.J. Simpson driving on the 405 in a white Bronco, so I don't have the right. So that'll be an interesting discussion, and maybe there is a way, there's a clearinghouse where revenue can be shared, but that's a big topic because there's so much footage that you could train on, but who really owns it and who has the right to train? So I thought that was an interesting sort of point that Rafi brought up. It's just, that's where all this stuff is going right at the beginning.
Huge.
Like who has the
Yeah.
right, who doesn't have the right?
So I'm going to pick a question and segue back to Rafi because I know you've got lots to say about it. What guardrails? This is from Paul Fileo. I hope I got that right. Thank you, Paul. You've got a couple of questions here. This second one is interesting around what guardrails or standards would you recommend folks in the news media use to ensure Gen AI LLMs are used ethically, accurately, safely, three different vectors, if you will. I love this one. I've used these a lot. There's a very interesting dynamic. You do a search, you're filled with adrenaline, you can't believe it picked up the Aaron Judge home run, this, that, and the other, and then you pay really close attention. You're like, wait a second, he's not running from third to home, he's running from first to third. That's really weird. What a subtle hallucination. Or I did another one where it was like confused the Dodgers and the Lakers in 2020. One of them lost the championship, etc. So we got into this idea, and I think actually I'm gonna go to Andy after this with the dog comment because I think you have an amazing analogy for how to think about this. But first to Rafi, what's your take? Tell us a little bit about what you're doing in terms of provenance, ethical, all this good stuff that I know you've got stuff to say already. It's one of the things you're really focused on.
Yeah. So first of all, we're providing a lot of tools to the journalists themselves within the CMS, right? As they're publishing stories, as they're converting scripts from the TV broadcast script to a digital story, tools that AI can assist with in order to give them a head start. And in every one of those instances, it requires human in the loop. So you are required to go and make sure that you're reviewing all that information, making sure that it's accurate, just as a journalist would typically do. For anything that's being manipulated for broadcast or digital distribution, like for example, we're doing with live translation, where we're taking a broadcast from our station, translating it, running it through a translator, and then rebroadcasting it onto YouTube Live with a very low latency in Spanish. There are guardrails that have to go into place there to ensure. And so right now we're doing a lot of testing to get to accuracy. We just went live today, so if you go to one of the 4 stations we're up, you should see it, and you should see a bunch of disclaimers on there. So that's one of the areas where we can say, look, we know this is not going to be perfect. We're asking you to, be patient with the technology. And what we're doing this for, obviously, is to reach a broader audience, specifically that are Spanish speaking, and hopefully can serve more people within those communities. Sinclair was very quickly part of the CAI, the Content Authenticity Initiative, and participating in the C2PA protocols as well. We're dedicated to continuing along those fronts. And those are just kind of like basic blocking and tackling. And then from a more of an infrastructure play, as an enterprise, we set up a governance committee, a steering committee, and then a broader AI forum so that we can field interest, use cases, pain points, et cetera, that we feel like can be solved from all the different parts of the organization. And then we can, we set up a governance structure as to like how things are going to be done so that we can avoid having any kind of mishaps.
Is it a fair statement? And I think we talked about this a little bit. I think about the local baseball feeds. We've all been in this space where it's like this terrible view. And I've thought for a long time, oh, AI is going to help us do a close-up, up-res it, different angle. And I'm thinking in my head, like, it's all sort of like, it's such a thin line between what's a deep fake and what's like a Gen AI up-res. It's almost, I mean, am I right? That's the same technology. I'm sort of faking it up to get a close up of my kid in center field because the camera is all the way. Is that fair, or is that something that's coming that's going to hit us, or we're going to have to grapple with? What do you think?
I mean, I don't know that I would call that necessarily deep fake. A deep fake is, fairly specific as to, trying to manipulate what something's, it was looking like to what something should look like.
So it's like the malicious intent.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to have malicious intent. If you're doing it with malicious intent, that's bad. Um, uh, so we'll have those guardrails in place in order to identify them, but it also comes with like a how much transparency is the public really interested in, right? So if you manipulate a photo or a video to eliminate, a crowd in the background, you're using AI to create essentially a deep fake, right? But that's not with malicious intent, right? And you'll have to do that. And look, you could have done that with Photoshop as well. It probably would take you a lot longer to do that, right? But having that information in there is important so that people can have the provenance and understanding what that video came from. Thing is, one video could probably be edited 100 times before it sees the light of day. So you're going to have a lot of that information, and then what information is going to be most meaningful for that public in order to have some kind of. So there might be a desensitization to it as well over time.
Right. You're talking, and I'm thinking in my head the Kate Middleton brouhaha. This poor gal who had like they photoshopped one piece of hair, but in the UK public goes nuts. I'm like, really? Like that's not. Andy, you had a great analogy about the golden retriever. Tell us about how you think about these hallucinations and what we need to do to kind of calm them down to get LLMs on air.
Yeah, so when we spoke before this, I had mentioned that one of the things you have to remember about the way the LLMs are programmed is that they're effectively a puppy dog or a golden retriever. They are eager to please you. And so they are just trying to bring you the information they think you are asking for. And the way we ask questions often can lead us down a path where we are unintentionally having it feed us what we want to hear. And so it is important as part of the guardrails. And by the way, I want to step back and say I'm glad to hear everything Rafi laid out for how Sinclair is approaching AI governance, because that is absolutely the right way. It takes a broad governance board to sort of help a big organization think about how they're going to do this, not only securely, not only ethically, but then how do you also like help train the employees to use it and how to go implement it, right? This is a learning moment for everybody. And so we have to have these things in place to go help with it. But there are simple things we can do where we set rules or reminders in the LLMs that we're using in our personal lives to remind it that we always want to fact check. We want a source. And it's important to make sure that that source is there. It's important to sort of question the validity of what it's giving us at times. Part of the notion I bring when I mentioned that earlier on that I had my own agents set up. Part of those are I use sort of the IT nomenclature. I have red team and blue team agents. I have ones that are there to help me, but then I have antagonistic editors. I have literally just an editor agent that's like, tear this apart. Tell me what's wrong with it. Tell me what's derivative. Tell me what I've said 1,000 times over and over that isn't landing. And it's not there to please me. Trust me. It's there to bring up the points that hopefully a real editor would be doing as part of what I'm doing, so that I have another perspective, because that's what we need to have in LLMs, but we're not really getting that. We're getting the perspective that it thinks we want to have back as part of it. And before I pass over the talking stick again, I do want to talk about that notion of like the moral or the gray lines between a deep fake and up-res and enhance, because I would argue that we're already in that gray territory, right? We've been using AI to enhance images. Hell, Zoom has literally like make me look slightly better version, like make the dark circles under my eyes go away and make me look a little less puffy. That's already there. That's AI. That's not, anything else other than that. Is that real? We just know it's there, and we just sort of implicitly assume that like, oh, a FaceTime video might not quite be the thing
Right.
we're thinking about. It is a much larger step to go to, well, did that angle of the sports actually exist? Or was it
Correct.
something that was created whole cloth? And that is where the data that's driving it is super important. And that's where I think like what the NBA is doing around with their Hawkeye system for getting such high levels of player data in place will help them have sort of a track record that is sort of a C2PA and CIA compliant type breadcrumb trail to say this is the data that this is what actually happened by the data that we captured, regardless of whether the video was augmented or enhanced or touched at some point. And I think that's the underlying data will continue to be the important part because that's the grounding source truth that we will have for all of this work with LLMs.
Yeah, I will say too, this hallucination thing, I just make what's one little point because I've been experimenting a lot. So I do some writing in this business and often send out, Brian, go get quotes. Sometimes somebody has a really great point, but they've taken a little while in this kind of roundabout way. I have this tool I've been using to do these kind of clipping things, and I found that it actually writes the summary of the point that the person's saying. And I'm like, it's super clear. I read it and I get it. And then I listen. It's like, it's not really the way he phrased it. But if I were writing an article and just did the verbatim quote, it would be awful. So it's actually an interesting idea of like, yeah, some of the hallucinations aren't necessarily a bad thing. But I think this is a segue into challenges. And I want to dive deep a little bit with you, Rafi, on AI dubbing. We talked about this a little bit. Like, there's a lot of challenges, right? Crosstalk, I understand, is, females are a little harder. Are you going to do the lip sync, not do the lip sync? Is 10 seconds, low latent enough, or do we need? So tell me a little bit, since you've been doing this super hardcore of like your idea of AI dubbing these stations in a different language. What's your take on the state of play? What are the biggest challenges that you're seeing, and how have you gotten through them? You talked about evaluating. Are you using other LLMs to evaluate the output of LLMs? How are you guys approaching that problem?
So last year we Tennis Channel was launching internationally, and we wanted to experiment with the lip sync and translation into multiple different languages. We launched Tennis Channel International in Germany, Austria, Switzerland, in Spain, and in India. And we wanted to see what those translations would look like, and see if the dubbing or the lip syncing would work. And to a large part, it did. Now, it's not instant. It still takes a lot of editing work to make sure the translations are accurate and they're timed correctly, because there's, certain phrases will be longer in one language and shorter in another. And so that can create a lot of like inconsistency with the cadence of the speaker. We also tested it in a kind of roundtable environment, right? You have a kind of like a part of the interruption type of situation where everybody's talking over each other, and it has a lot of difficulty doing that. So one workaround we figured out with that was like, currently everybody's mic'd and all audio goes into one feed, but then we figured out like if we can just take the individual feeds and have them separately, then the AI will be able to pick that up separately and be able to identify the voices more clearly. But it's time consuming and it's somewhat expensive to do that. So unless you have a really valuable asset that can be kind of evergreen, that's not really a great option. And it's also like it's a trickier play, especially when you're dealing with talent, to make sure that this consent is cleared ahead of time to say that you're going to be doing this type of thing and why you're going to be doing this. You ultimately don't want to make someone sound like something that they didn't want to sound like, right? So it gets a little bit trickier there with pre-produced stuff with talent that work for you. That's a little bit easier. But then when you're working with news, you obviously don't want to have somebody that you're interviewing or a celebrity or a public figure out there where you're manipulating their voice without their consent, right? So especially for the lip syncing. Now, for live translation, it's a little bit more flexible because it's essentially doing what SAP has been doing. And, to that extent is, all right, can you get the translation done? How quickly can you get it done? Right now we're testing with live, right? So we take the ingest, we're ingesting the broadcast feed, running it through a translator, and then spitting it back out. There's a lot of different factors that go into there. Again, with the cadence, matching the voices with the speakers, it doesn't always get it perfect. So for example, if I'm in the studio and then I cut over to a shot of me in the field, my voice is going to sound a little bit different to the AI itself, and then it's going to maybe think that I'm, speaker number 2 is speaker number 3, and change it. That all that stuff is kind of getting better over time.
Yeah.
It's we're down to at like a roughly a 10-second latency from live broadcast to digital distribution. That seems to be good enough for news. Maybe if we were working on with sports, probably a little too long, but yeah, I would be more comfortable with having a shorter time frame.
Yeah. Pete, we're going to segue, and I'm going to let all of you talk about this. Super interesting space. Full disclosure, I've got a client in this space. It's multimodal search, or what I also call LLM integrated search. We seem to be at a moment in time, whether you're dealing with a real-time production and a commentator or a producer or a journalist, where I think we're entering kind of an age of video super intelligence, where, hey, if last year you asked me to do a competitive intel assignment, I'd, go to 30 vendors, get all their webinars, watch 30 hours of that, do all this research. Whereas now you kind of dump all this stuff into these big libraries and you can pull out footage wherever you want and recreate stories and things like that. Pete, I know you've seen some of this stuff. What are the ideas that you think are super interesting in the realm of like automated meta generation or automated tagging, or hey, I don't need metadata. I just want, someone doing the fair catch signal. Can I train my system to do that? What's your thought on the most exciting use cases there in the video search space?
I think for me, it's crawl, walk, run, right? So most of these large language models are helping just make databases or libraries better. We talked about the California closet analogy, right? Where you have all this video and it's sort of in a library, not very well organized in a way of sort of getting to it and getting access to it. And so I think what we're seeing is that's how they start. That's how they go in. And then what are the other 10 use cases that once an asset is meta tagged with these large language models that revenue can be generated? Because I think, whether it's all of us or the partners we work with, everybody's looking under every sofa cushion to figure out where they can monetize their IP. So I think more and more, you're just going to see this crawl, walk, run mentality. And then if you can do associations, maybe with ads where you see something on the screen, you can personalize the ad to what you're seeing on the screen, book a reservation to go to this location now or something along those lines. So we're seeing more and more once it's meta tagged and the large language model is sort of going down that path, you can start to do all these things. I did want to comment on the audio stuff. We work with a company called LingoPal that does a lot of this translation stuff. And I think that's really if interesting what Rafi came up with. It's like, how do you get the rights, right? To get the consent from that athlete who's at the press conference doing something. And then lo and behold, you tell him or her that I'm going to do a Chinese version and it's going to sound like this. I think that's really an appropriate sort of discussion because I think that's going to come up a lot more. I think it was interesting, long story short, when Netflix was buying content from Warner Brothers, a million years ago to basically put it on Netflix, they would ask for the audio rights. And what I thought was so interesting, there was a lot of people like, why are you asking for the audio rights? No one ever asked for the audio rights. Well, lo and behold, we know why they did, right? In some cases, they got it as part of the licensing deal, but they were able to create, right, 25, 30 different versions of that Warner Brothers content, with different languages. And I think you're just going to see that as being another way for everybody to make revenue.
Yeah, I'll segue this one to Andy really quickly about like the explosion. You mentioned LingoPal, have to put out Cam.ai, Deep Tune, Deep Dub, right? I personally, and I was at Amagi doing partnerships. I don't think in my entire career I've ever seen so many well-backed startups pop up out of nowhere. And I guess this is Andy to you, and you made a point about the slight variations that these technologies have that might have slight differences for use case. How do you think of it? Like being it from at Microsoft, what's your take when you see this like crop of a ton of startups coming up, all tremendously funded?
Well, they all are definitely tackling slightly different use cases out of the gate, depending on who their core customer base is. But I think we will see a sort of eventual convergence of the pieces. I'm fascinated. I'm honestly less fascinated by the sort of the localization part, although I feel like localization has gotten so much better in an age of generative AI. I'm sort of interested in the keeping the same language, but perhaps creating a new audio track for a different audience, a different generation, or a different demographic. The great example I've talked about a lot with friends. I don't watch sports, but I work a lot with sports, and I would pay extra money for a slightly more descriptive explainer track for some of what's going on because I don't know what the hell's going on, but LLM can explain it to me, and I'd even wait an extra 10 seconds to get that if I needed to. So I think there's a whole other genre. Like when I say we're just at the tip of exploring these areas, that's kind of what I mean. Like we're using it now to get better with the language translations, and that's excellent. And I think we will have places where lip sync matters, and sometimes it won't, and that's okay. But I think this notion of just being able to have a version that explains something to my mother-in-law
Yep.
or to me in a way that I immediately get because the system understands my level of expertise in something is
Yep.
wildly fascinating.
I can't. This is the most amazing panel. So listen, I coached my kids in my son in baseball, and he wasn't really a huge baseball fan, but I coached him 1 to 6, and I thought about this exactly. I want to, and by the way, I'm in the San Francisco market. Kruk and Kuip are the best announcers in the business, and I noticed that there were times when you had these teaching moments. I would love a shot like here's where it's not a force out and how you handle it. Here's how you handle it when there's a guy on third. So to your point about versioning, and that's a long segue to you, Rafi, because you talked about this exactly. Like, hey, how can we do this presentable news thing, but also hit TikTok? Take that where you will, versioning and AI and how that can be, LLMs can be used to accomplish those goals.
Yeah, I mean, you're seeing a lot of companies pop up now with what can be done with video, with manipulating video, and it takes a little bit of an understanding of what's in the video, right? You're seeing companies go out and track the audio and then convert it into a script, and then take the script and understand what's happening in those videos. And those are kind of basic blocking and tackling. But now some other multimodal models like 12 Labs came out with more of a deeper understanding of what's happening contextually. There's a couple of them that are out there. And those are starting to be deployed into software with some startups, which is great. And these start to look like mini editors, and you can do a lot, right? So there's a lot with capturing the key moments, quickly going from a 4-hour live thing and being able to clip out a 30-second clip of somebody crying in an audience because that was a meaningful moment. But the other thing is, well, how do we take what's happening in a broadcast situation? You've got cameras in the studio, and how do you take that content and convert it into a version that's going to be meaningful to a person that's on TikTok? Because you see what happens in the newsroom, and it's been roughly the same for 50 years. I'm sure a lot of people are going to get mad at me for saying that, but like roughly the same. But like you get audiences that are just not interested in hearing news voice. How do you get a more of a conversational or a more aggressive tone with going out and communicating? And if there are tools that enable you to do that effectively and quickly, then yeah, you can increase your distribution and audience to people that might want to have that content delivered to them in the format that they want.
Yeah, I want to keep with you, Rafi. I want to shout out my client OmniSearch, Moments Lab, Deep VA. The list goes on and on. We're very much at the beginning. The old school computer vision stuff, for example, face recognition, even like 3 years ago, you would have to re-index stuff. We've already made a lot of progress there. Then you have LLMs. We're literally not even in the dugout. It's like pre-game, like nobody even knows what they're doing. Then you have this kind of scene description, language stuff. It's sort of in the middle, right? Where you get these kind of interesting things. No disrespect to 12. I think they're trying to do the whole like big, whole enchilada 50 million, but it's like you get these things back. Like if you're not getting the great result, instead of saying like Robert Kennedy, whatever, make it like Robert Kennedy in a room with Diases and other, right? So that's kind of one thing. And to kick it off back to you, Rafi, specifically about like the Tiger King and the idea of news and the moments. Well, we talked about the story. You had the Kennedy hearings, 8 hours, 2 days of hearings. I was watching them and thought it would be the biggest news event ever. Turns out we had the tragic accident in DC. And I can just imagine newsrooms being like, man, I had like an hour of amazing stuff. So, and I want you to dive into that a little bit about like the Tiger King and so forth. Like, if one of the things that a news rundown today versus a YouTube, one of the things you could just say very easily, like, yeah, more time, deeper into things, deeper examples, etc. This is kind of a perfect like tool for you guys. Like, hey, that story, I remember we did something way back when. Tell us about the Tiger King story.
Yeah, I mean, look, we've got decades of content from hundreds of stations across the country, and a lot of that stuff was still on tape. Some of it's digitized, maybe not organized all that well, not tagged with the right metadata, etc. And there's value in some of it, but it's literally a needle in a haystack if you're trying to figure out what's monetizable. And so, we're taking measures to index our content, and utilize AI, and also cross-reference it with important moments that happen during certain time periods. For example, like Tiger King came out. We had tons of interviews with Joe Exotic, but and we could have taken that very quickly and kind of jumped on that zeitgeist and monetized that content a little bit further, right? It just didn't happen. It wasn't organized as well, right? So yeah, we are taking a lot of measures into, digging deeper into our archives, understanding what's in it, without really having to go and digitize every single frame, because that will get very expensive and may not have a return, right? So how do you find the moments that have high value and then be able to quickly access them? That is really, it's a big project.
Correct.
Important.
Very tricky. People don't know, like, hey, if you've got a 2 hour video, like most of the most advanced models, that's the longest transcript you're going to get.
Yeah.
Right. So you got 8 hours of thing, and then you immediately start to think, oh, the old school stuff, actually, that works really well on gamer level GPUs. You don't need these big, heavy. So all of a sudden you're like, yeah, if I've got an archive, maybe I just do some sampling or pull the text before and after, etc. I'm going to go back to Paul Filio, another great question here, and I'll throw this to you, Pete, and then to Andy. What are the other cutting edge ways that LLMs can be used to create more dynamic and personalized entertainment experiences for viewers? Pete, I think that's right up your alley.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're going to start to see is when you can combine databases of affinities that people have. I'm a LeBron James fan. I love the Lakers. What kind of personal video clips, personal stories, so we talked about earlier, ESPN creating a personalized sports center. And I think you're just going to see more and more snackable content that's personalized for all the users. You're starting to see a little of that on Thursday Night Football, where they're basically personalizing ads based on what you bought in the Amazon store, right? So if I'm a pet owner and I buy dog food, maybe the ad that I get at ad break for Thursday Night Football is going to be a pet ad as opposed to something else. So you're going to see large language models and agents, AI agents, be these short order cooks, right? That are basically putting together personalized content, personalized ads, e-commerce, et cetera, for the user to basically dive into and just be more engaged. And I think you're going to see that a lot faster than we think.
Let's take a pivot a little bit into the fast world. Andy, I know you did some work in fast, I think working with Fremantle. That was maybe a little more on interactivity, but why don't you throw in here a little bit about like AI playlisting? You've seen some of that stuff?
Sure.
Like, yeah.
Well, I get sort of pull in the personalization and that playlisting, because I think they all start to fall into that same world and helps answer what Paul was asking about. It's not a single LLM element here that we're talking about that puts this together. This is where the power of like an agent-based workflow comes together, because you need something that goes and understands the content at an intimate level. And that there's really two different pieces of that. There's like the traditional video indexer. I'm gonna do a frame-based decomposition of every every picture in this and understand every object and the transcript and all of it. Then there's the temporal understanding, and that's more like where we're getting with LLMs today, which is like, give me a summary of what this happened in this video. And that is important because it captures something over time. Traditional metadata tooling isn't going to catch what is a zoom shot or what is a car crash, because that's something that happens over multiple frames, and they're really focused on individual frame decomposition as part of what they do. So that's like the first two pieces of the puzzle that you need to go have is like agents that understand that lens of the content. Then we need something like what Pete was talking about, something that intimately understands me. All the data about how I've consumed things, all the data that I've freely given, sort of both the bias and the unbiased information about how I watch stuff. He might say he's really a LeBron James fan, but he probably also has a couple people he hate watches. So he doesn't want to say he's a fan of them, but he's always going to make sure he watches them because he wants to check out what they're doing. And so that might be sort of the unbiased information that a system pays attention to. And then you start doing the analysis. The LLM has all the data from those sort of three different vectors and maybe a little bit from the social zeitgeist of what's being talked about. And that starts to be the blend of like what I'm going to get fed. And I think the important part of that is that we don't just go down a rabbit hole of constantly reinforcing only the things you like. I think part of personalization is actually challenging you as well. What are the new things that are outside of this? And how often should I inject something new? And does it help reinforce the things that you really like, or does it show you a new branch of something you didn't realize that you liked that was
Yeah.
a new thread? And that's where these systems, I think, start getting more sophisticated. We're still in, I think, the rabbit hole of just feeding you the constant things that you love and like, but I think getting to a learning base where it's also injecting things that are maybe a new challenge to you is the most interesting to me.
Yeah, I'm gonna end this. By the way, any other questions? Put them in the chat. I'm gonna give one question to the three of you. It's gonna be a big hairy question, and it's gonna start with the idea of, in my experience using these LLMs, they do seem to remove something really important about personality, right? Like there's like little tiny things that they miss that kind of make all the difference in the world. And I'm gonna shift that to video. And what I'm gonna say there is like you check out like Sora and these video creation tools, and again you had this initial like 15 seconds like, oh, this is amazing. Here's the question. Like, do we get to a point, and tell me what you think about this, when and what timeline, where a Sora could produce more than just kind of like a 15-second kind of funny little snippet, where it actually could be, and maybe in use with Agentic or whatever, be able to produce a pretty compelling newscast, or sports highlight show for you, Pete, or Andy, entertainment around game shows. So I'll kick it off first to you, Rafi. What's your take on video generation's actual hardcore use cases, if any, in the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, I think, can it be done? Yeah, I think it will be able to piece together something really comprehensive and on brand, and on, keeping the tone that you're looking for, with the consistency of, characters, whether they're news anchors or whatever. What will that happen in news? I don't know. There's a lot that happened between now and then before that actually becomes a reality. We'll probably see more of it in just regular entertainment, and especially with tons of creators out there going out playing with these tools out there, see what they come up with.
I mean, let me just a little more pointed follow-up to you. Like, are you of the mindset that like, yeah, these really they're powerful, but there's no personality. Like the videos, you can tell immediately. Like, where are you on that spectrum? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, that is true today. Um, but there are mechanisms that you can deploy even with, prompting that gets it more accurate.
Right.
And if you're, so for example, with we're helping to produce scripts for and stories for some of our journalists, and I asked it like, well, what does how does Como differ from Cairo or King or Kong in the same market, right? What is that tone? So I had to interpret what, what are the differentiating factors, and it got it roughly correct. And then you can start to say, you know what, actually, we're more community oriented or something like that, where you could start putting in some of those tone representations, so that it does keep a consistent voice throughout the types of articles that you're writing, right? And then that could change from article to article. That's fine. But then I said, all right, well, take the same article and write it as if The Onion wrote it, or write it as if Fox News wrote it, or whatever, name any other. And it had a good sense of what an understanding of what the tones of those other properties would be. And so if you can define it clearly for what you are and what you want to represent, I feel like it can get there.
Yeah, super cool, very interesting. Andy, to you next. What's your take on the idea of generative video? How far does it go? Is it just the storyboarding stuff, or are you pretty excited we're gonna have a Blair Witch Project moment for this? What's your take? I think you're on mute.
I am 100% on mute because I didn't want to get my clickety clackety keyboard out there. No, I think news is actually a place where this could potentially happen. There is definitely a news formula for what the newsroom looks like. You're throwing two other videos as part of it. We saw the stuff that like NBC did with the Olympics for their highlight piece, where they had Al Michaels giving a synthetic voiceover of like, here are the highlights that are going to mean something to you. And there could be a model for something like that that's curating, highlights of things. I'm frankly surprised we already don't have something on Netflix that is like, here's everything that was put up since you were here last, that might be interesting to you. Not as a string of videos I have to click through and look at, because that's time consuming, but just as like a highlight video or something else. So I think all of that is coming, but it will be in small doses and in a controlled way. It's not going to be
Yeah.
something in a movie theater anytime soon, but it's going to be something that matters to me as the individual.
Yeah, Pete, last one to you here. It says it's a question related to the one I just asked. How do you see AI agents evolving in media production? Will we see an AI virtual producer, a virtual editor, a creative assistant? Sort of an interesting question. I'll just say this, like, if you're just listening to the news cycle and you see that, like, hey, the US doesn't think that Russia started the war anymore, you just go, hey, I have a recording from Tulsi Gabbard. It literally was last week. She literally said, Russia started the war. There's these fascinating things that you could see. You could imagine an AI surfacing and then handing to a human to make the more, add the personality to it. Long-winded setup for you, Pete. Last word. How is the AI agent going to make media production better with respect to producers, editor roles, creative assistants, things like this?
Yeah, I think you're dead on, right? They're going to be short order cooks, right? That are sitting there basically putting together all these pieces on a one-to-one basis. CNN, I've always encouraged them to go and completely meta tag Larry King. Like, imagine if he had an interview with Gorbachev and it was relatable to what's going on in Russia, and then you saw the affinity that people clicked on it, then okay, note to self, in the future, I can provide more, Larry King content and what that might look like. So yeah, I just think it's just going to be normal fare. There's a lot of cool companies that are out there sort of acting as that agent or that short order cook that can go fetch, retrieve, and come back and say, okay, this is exactly what I think you want to see or hear or listen to as well. So yeah, it's definitely going to happen.
Thank you guys so much. Rafi, Andy Beach, Pete Scott, Steve, thank you for giving us the platform, and thanks for the great questions, guys.
Oh,
Thank you
yeah.
so much.
Thanks for having us, guys.
Yeah, this was just a great discussion. This was amazing. And great questions too, like Brian said. Just fantastic. Thank you all so much. Before we go, I do want to announce our gift card winner. The track you heard when we were coming in was correctly identified by Garrick Huey. So congratulations, Garrick. And that was, of course, Melting Pot by Booker T and the MGs. Please join us back here at 2:30 for a special one-on-one fireside chat with Tim Force Siglin and Christopher Levy from by DRM. on the state and cost of streaming piracy in 2025. I hope to see you all there.